Imagine a city so powerful that no nation dared to challenge it. Its walls were impenetrable, its riches dazzled the world, and its king saw himself as a god. Babylon was not just a capital, it was the center of civilization, culture, and military power. But then, something unexpected happened. The Hebrew prophets announced its destruction long before its fall. The empire that seemed invincible disappeared, exactly as prophesied in the Bible. But what about today? Is there anything left of ancient Babylon? And more importantly, does its fate hold a prophetic meaning for our times? In this video, we will explore how Babylon became the greatest power of the ancient world, the biblical prophecies that foretold its ruin, the precise fulfillment of those prophecies, and what remains of this empire. And finally, how Babylon could still play a role in the prophetic history of the end times. Few cities in human history carry as much symbolic weight as Babylon. To the ancients, it was the center of the world, a place of unparalleled wealth, impenetrable walls, and temples that seemed to touch the sky. However, for biblical writers, Babylon was more than just a city. It was a symbol of human arrogance and rebellion against God. Babylon did not emerge out of nowhere. Its origins trace back to the earliest days of humanity. Genesis 11 tells us that after the flood, men decided to build a tower that would reach the heavens. This project, known as the Tower of Babel, was not just a construction. It was a declaration of independence from God. The human desire to exalt oneself above the Creator has always been the essence of Babylon. Many centuries later, this city reappeared on the world stage with a power that no one could ignore. From being a mere Mesopotamian kingdom, Babylon became an empire capable of dominating nations, subjugating kings, and even challenging the very God of Israel. Babylon's ultimate rise occurred under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, between 605 and 562 BC, the greatest monarch of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty. Ambitious and ruthless, he transformed the city into the greatest power of his time. His architectural projects were colossal: the Temple of Marduk, the Ishtar Gate, and, according to tradition, the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But it wasn't just architecture that made Babylon an impressive city. Its culture was advanced, with astronomers, mathematicians, and scribes recording everything on clay tablets. Trade flourished, making Babylon a hub for merchants from all over the Middle East. However, behind all this glory, there was something that made Babylon unique. It was not just a political and economic empire, but also a deeply pagan religious center. Babylon did not merely tolerate other religions. It actively sought to impose its faith on the conquered peoples. The chief god of the Babylonian pantheon was Marduk, but there were many others, such as Ishtar, Enlil, and Shamash. Every temple in the city was a monument to idolatry and mysticism. This obsession with gods was not harmless. Babylon took pride in its occult practices, astrology, and sorcery. The Babylonian kings consulted diviners before making decisions, believing they could manipulate destiny. This cult of the occult was part of the city's identity, and it was precisely this that led it into direct confrontation with the God of Israel. Babylon not only built an empire, but also destroyed the kingdom of Judah. In the year 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem, set fire to Solomon's temple, took the sacred utensils, and deported thousands of Jews to Babylon. Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, noble young men who were forcibly taken to serve in the Babylonian court. The Bible tells us that Daniel and his friends faced great challenges in remaining faithful to God amidst an idolatrous culture. Babylon tried to change their names, their diet, and even their religious identity. However, they remained steadfast. God honored their faithfulness, revealing his sovereignty by humbling Babylon's powerful rulers and proving that no king on earth can compare to the King of heaven. Nebuchadnezzar saw himself as an absolute ruler, chosen by the gods to reign over all nations. His pride was so great that he built a golden statue and demanded that everyone worship it, as recorded in the book of Daniel chapter 3. But God does not share his glory with anyone. At the height of his arrogance, Nebuchadnezzar had a disturbing dream, which Daniel interpreted as a divine warning. The king would be punished for his pride, losing his sanity and living like an animal for 7 years. And that is exactly what happened. This episode demonstrated that no matter how powerful an empire is, it is nothing before the sovereignty of God. Babylon could build colossal walls and challenge nations, but it could not withstand divine judgment. Even so, the city did not learn its lesson. Babylon continued in its arrogance and idolatry, and its destruction was already decreed. The glory of Babylon seemed eternal. Who could challenge such a majestic empire with its colossal walls and endless wealth? However, God had already decreed its fate long before its downfall. The biblical prophets announced Babylon's judgment centuries before its destruction. Their words were not mere human predictions, but direct declarations from God, showing that no empire, no matter how grand it appears, can resist the sovereignty of the Almighty. Around 700 BC, the prophet Isaiah had already foretold what would happen to Babylon. In Isaiah 13:19-20 we read, "And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pride of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited again, nor will anyone dwell there." From generation to generation, this prophecy was radical. Babylon had not yet reached the peak of its power when Isaiah proclaimed these words. How could such a majestic empire be completely destroyed and abandoned forever? Isaiah also revealed that Babylon would fall into the hands of the Medes and Persians, Isaiah 13:17. Something that seemed impossible at the time, as the Babylonians still dominated the region with absolute strength. But history proved that God's words never fail. More than 100 years later, the prophet Jeremiah reinforced this prophecy. During Babylon's peak, he declared, "Babylon will become a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, an object of horror and scorn, where no one will dwell." Jeremiah 51:37. Jeremiah also described how Babylon would fall. In Jeremiah 51:31-32, he spoke of messengers running to warn about the invasion and of defenses being taken by surprise. The accuracy of these words is astonishing, as this is exactly how the city fell. But before its final collapse, Babylon faced an event that visibly and undeniably demonstrated God's judgment. King Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, ruled Babylon when everything began to fall apart. He knew his grandfather's story and God's judgment upon him, but he chose to ignore those warnings. On that fateful night, Belshazzar held a lavish banquet for 1,000 nobles, and in an act of extreme desecration, ordered that the sacred utensils from the Temple of Jerusalem, those that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen decades earlier, be brought in. He and his guests used these sacred objects to toast the pagan gods. Then something terrifying happened. Suddenly, a mysterious hand appeared and began writing on the palace wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, Daniel 5:25. The king turned pale with fear. None of his wise men could interpret the message, but they called for Daniel, who revealed its meaning. Mene. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Upharsin, Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, the army of Persian King Cyrus the Great invaded Babylon. Without significant resistance, They took the city, killed Belshazzar, and ended Babylonian rule, exactly as the prophecies had foretold. The Persian takeover of Babylon was not a conventional battle. The city's walls were so massive that it seemed impossible to invade. But Cyrus found an alternative way. He ordered his soldiers to divert the course of the Euphrates River, which ran through the center of the city. With the water level lowered, his troops marched through the dry riverbed and entered the city without resistance. The Babylonian people, accustomed to the security of their walls, were caught off guard. While the elite were celebrating, the city was silently taken. Thus, in a single night, the seemingly indestructible empire completely collapsed. Babylon fell, but one question remained. Was this merely the end of an empire, or the beginning of an even worse fate? In the following chapters, we will see how Babylon continued to deteriorate until it was reduced to a desert, fully fulfilling God's judgment. The night Babylon fell to the Persians marked the end of an era. The empire that seemed eternal crumbled without a significant fight, fulfilling the words of Isaiah and Jeremiah. But this was only the first phase of its destruction. Babylon was not immediately reduced to ruins, but entered a progressive decline that would eventually lead to the complete fulfillment of biblical prophecies. After the conquest, Cyrus the Great allowed the city to continue existing. He even favored the Jews, permitting them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, just as had been prophesied in Isaiah 44:28. Babylon remained important, but it was no longer the center of the world. Over time, the Persians moved the capital to Susa and Persepolis, and Babylon began to lose influence. What was once a great empire became just a province within a larger kingdom. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and took Babylon in 331 BC. Fascinated by the city, he wished to restore it as the capital of his vast empire. However, before he could begin its reconstruction, he died suddenly in 323 BC at the age of 32. After Alexander's death, his generals divided his empire, and Babylon fell into oblivion. New urban centers emerged, such as Seleucia, which quickly became the dominant city in the region. Babylon, with no political or commercial importance, began to be abandoned. In the following centuries, the city continued to deteriorate. Its buildings were looted for the construction of new cities, and what remained was consumed by time and the desert. By the time of the Roman Empire, Babylon was practically a pile of rubble. In the 7th century AD, with the expansion of Islam, any remaining trace of urban life disappeared. The prophecy of Isaiah 13:20-21 was fulfilled with precision. It will never be inhabited or lived in from generation to generation. No Arab will pitch his tent there, no shepherds will rest their flocks there, but desert creatures will lie there. To this day, Babylon remains a desolate place, with scattered ruins in present-day Iraq. Even modern attempts at reconstruction have failed, proving that God not only judged this city, but erased it from history as a world power. But did Babylon really disappear? Or does it still exist in another way? In the next chapter, we will see how the Bible speaks of a spiritual Babylon that continues to influence the world to this day. Babylon fell more than 2,500 years ago, but did it really vanish? Well, if we only look at its ruins in Iraq, the answer seems obvious. The city is a desert of stones, a silent reminder of its former glory. However, the Bible gives us a much deeper perspective. Babylon may have been physically destroyed, but its spiritual and symbolic influence remains alive to this day. Currently, the ruins of Babylon are located about 90 kilometers south of Baghdad, Iraq. For centuries, archaeologists have excavated the site and discovered remains of the Ishtar Gate, the Temple of Marduk, and parts of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. What remains is only a shadow of what was once the most glorious city of the ancient world. In the 1980s, Saddam Hussein attempted to rebuild Babylon, ordering the restoration of some buildings and even erecting a new version of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. He even had his name inscribed on the bricks alongside that of the ancient king. However, this attempt failed. Wars, crises, and political instability prevented any significant reconstruction. This fulfills exactly the prophecy of Isaiah 13:20. It will never be inhabited, nor will anyone dwell in it from generation to generation. No great civilization has managed to rebuild Babylon. The place remains in ruins, serving as a testimony to God's judgment. But despite this, biblical Babylon has not completely disappeared. In the book of Revelation, written centuries after Babylon's destruction, the name of the city reappears. But this time, not as a physical city, but as a global system of corruption and opposition to God. In Revelation 17 and 18, Babylon is represented as a woman sitting on many waters, dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones. She is called the Great Harlot, the mother of harlotries and the abominations of the earth. This Babylon represents much more than a place. It symbolizes the union of political, economic, and religious power in a system that rebels against God. Many scholars see this spiritual Babylon as a figure of materialism, moral corruption, and false religion that dominate the modern world. Just as ancient Babylon relied on its wealth and idolatry, today's world also exalts money, pleasure, and self-sufficiency, rejecting God's principles. If we look around us, we will see that many values of ancient Babylon still dominate society. The worship of pleasure, uncontrolled power, modern idolatry, money, fame, technology, and the open rejection of God are part of our daily lives. However, the Bible teaches us that just as ancient Babylon was judged, spiritual Babylon will also come to an end. In Revelation 18:2, an angel proclaims, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt. For every impure spirit, this system will not last forever. God will bring judgment just as he did with Nebuchadnezzar and his descendants." Babylon leaves us with a warning. No nation, empire, or system can defy God with impunity. We can learn from history and choose to live according to God's principles or follow the path of arrogance and self-sufficiency, which ultimately always leads to destruction. If there is one thing the Bible teaches us, it is that God always fulfills his promises. Just as ancient Babylon fell exactly as he said, modern Babylon will also fall. The only question is, where will we be when that happens? The story of Babylon is not just about the past. It speaks directly to our present and future. The prophecies were fulfilled with astonishing precision, proving that God rules over history. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe we are living in the times of the spiritual Babylon of Revelation? Leave your comment below. I would love to read your perspective. And if this video has blessed your life, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. This helps us continue bringing content that strengthens your faith. See you in the next video. God bless you.